Haven't you missed farm? Okay, page 2. So under standards of practice, that little flyer I gave you, they had some good points here. One is that just assume most adults have not had the vaccinations they should. I'll go through and I'll show you some of them. Some of them, it's like 20%. So there's probably very good reasons of bringing up with almost everybody you see about their vaccines. Patients may not even realize they need vaccines. So adults, if they were immunized as a kid, I bet you a lot of them think, I'm done. So they may not be aware that there's things out there. So assess at every clinical encounter. Strongly recommend vaccines that any adult patient needs. Most people at this point are going to go okay, some of them won't. I find the best time to have this conversation is at flu vaccine season. Okay? Some vaccines you can give with the flu, like Pneumovax, you can give them together. Some you can't. But it's a good time people will come in, they'll get their vaccines, their flu, and you can say, okay, you also need these. May not be able to give them all at that time, but you can have that conversation. And then documentation is so important. If you don't document something, it has not happened. I'm sure they've told you that already. So really important. There are really neat apps now that you can get, you can tell your patients to get, that you can put all your vaccinations in. I'm telling you, when you start having kids, get an app, get something, because it's a pain in the butt to run down the vaccination schedule every time you need it, because every sport, every time they go to do something at school, anything special they want to do, everybody wants to know their vaccination schedule.
I wanted to ask on that too, because I had to get some vaccines before coming here, and I had no idea, because my parents didn't keep good records.
Yep.
I went to the Oklahoma State Health Department, and they told me that there was a site I could go to that no matter where it was I got my vaccine, they had them all there. And they even printed it out for me to give me a list of every vaccine I've ever
I
got.
have never heard
And
that.
there's a database in the state of Oklahoma that
Really?
register every single vaccine.
I wonder why they do that, but nobody ever tells you that. I just always go to the doctor and they would fax it. You know, the pediatrician.
So like when I was little, like about my age, I'm 25, so that was about when they started actually registering
Really?
them. Because I have some registered and some don't.
Okay, well Cameron's 24, so that's
they-
probably why.
Yeah, they
Okay.
started doing that, because I did the same thing with the health department, and they had all my vaccines. I was like,
Wow.
that's so nice.
That
And
is
they'll print it
nice.
for you for free too.
And they sign
What's
like
the
where they
website?
gave it.
Because some things your kids will not be able to do things if you can't
Oh, it
show
had to be
proof. Or they'll want to get a titer from you. Do some of you have to get a titer to figure out if you had enough? Okay, so some people, they don't know, so they'll run a titer, and if you got a titers in the right range, you won't have to be vaccinated. Okay, all right. So there is a group that's called the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practice, the ACIP. This is the group that gets together on a regular basis and they review all the recommendations for vaccinations. They publish every year, they put out. So every year, about probably a little bit earlier, but near this time, they will put out adult immunization recommendations 2017. That's what I have given you. They do the same for kids. So I call it up every year. It is a group, it shows you there, all the people that are on it. Their website is embedded in the CDC. So if you can't remember the name of this committee, you can go on the CDC website and it will bring it up. They post their meetings, they're public. You can go on and watch them. They also print out or post all of their recommendations and their minutes on that website as well. They are usually adopted then by the CDC and then disseminated. So this is really an important committee. Always watch for them. I never go by recommendations for vaccinations except what this group puts out. And I've given you the website there. And they also publish them in Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. If you're not familiar with that, that's a great one. Great little publication that comes out. I don't know if it's not weekly. It's not a weekly. Maybe it is. But everything that has to do with health, they put their advisories, recommendations, go in that report. That's a really important tool, the MMWR. Or people call it Morbidity and Mortality. Comments or questions on that? Okay, let's start with the flu. These all reflect what is in the advisories. All the handouts that I gave you are pretty much summarized in my handout. So if you haven't looked at this in color, this is out of one of the adult advisories. So here's your vaccines. Here are the age groups that they designate them in. And then they color code them. So yellow is recommended for adults who meet the age requirement. Purple is additional if they have other medical needs or indications. They're in purple. And it tells you how many doses. So when it's blank here, you'll see that for herpes zoster, for the zoster vaccine, Zostavax, you're not going to see it before the age of 60 in terms of recommended, even though people get it. I got it a long time ago. Okay, and here's the second page. This gives you pregnancy. So these are special groups. So pregnancy, immunocompromised, HIV, infection, asplenia, kidney failure, heart disease, chronic liver disease, diabetes, healthcare personnel, men who have sex with men. So healthcare personnel, you will see with each of these, usually there is a statement of need for each of those. So you'll find that most of these are going to be recommended. So see, here's your live attenuated. So you see they're contraindicated pregnancy and immunocompromised, just kind of to drive that home. And then again, doses and then different medical conditions that they designate by color. Questions about those? There's not that many for adults, but especially when you get to kids, you're going to faint. That's why you have to have something you can look at. If you work in peds all the time, you'll know it. There's a very good app that the CDC has that has all these recommendations in it. And I put it in your, I think it's in this. It's in the PowerPoint. Okay, and then on this page, I like this one because it goes over contraindications. They're very easy. I didn't put them in your handout, but these are just easy. So if somebody's had a severe reaction to them in the past, that's hypersensitivity, then you don't use it. If people have allergies to eggs, then you may look for alternatives. So that used to knock a lot of people out because we would raise the virus in an egg, and then we would culture it. Well, people had really severe allergies to eggs would have severe allergies to the vaccine itself. We don't use eggs very much anymore. We use other cells, cell-based incubators in order to grow those viruses. So that's a severe anaphylaxis, moderate to or severe acute illness with or without fever. So if you go in and you're sick when you get your flu vaccine, they'll ask you if you had a fever in the last 24 hours. They won't give it to you. So if you're already ill, they're usually not going to administer a vaccine. So that would be a precaution because when you get well, we're going to give it to you again. If you look at these others, additional, you'll see the changes like CNS changes, immunodeficiencies. Here's your live attenuated. Here's your varicella, again, live attenuated, so you're not going to use it immunocompromised. And herpes zoster, all live attenuated. If you look at these go more to different things. Like if you've got a history of Guillain-Barré, then you won't give them that vaccine again. So that's one we've already mentioned. You'll see that with several of them. Seizures. So usually these other contraindications were related to neurologic adverse effects. So it's pretty easy to remember the contraindications to the vaccines. Hypersensitivity, egg allergy, and again it depends on the type of egg allergy, history of Guillain-Barré, and neurologic. So not too bad. At this point I just want you to be able to group them, or immunodeficiency. Okay. So let's talk about the flu. probably for an annual vaccination, this is one of the best performing, 44%. So you still have quite a few people who never get it. With a preponderance of places to get it now, it's still surprising that people don't get it. All right, so let's look under it. So it is an inactivated form, or you can get the fractional subunit vaccine, also comes as a recombinant, so know that, know those. Know the indication, all persons 6 months and older who don't have a contraindication to the vaccine. Kids, they're going to use two doses, adults, or older kids, adolescents, adults. Not worrying about kids right now, I'm just worried about adults. So adults are only going to have one dose. When is flu season? That's important because we are relying on the body to produce antibodies, then we need at least 2 weeks. So the flu season is designated usually the 1st of November through, just depends, March. Last year it went very late, went into May. So they would like everybody to be vaccinated by the end of October. Usually we'll start, we used to not start until October. Some of that is when you can get the flu vaccine. So it's heavily regulated. And you have to order it pretty far in advance. So most of your office managers are going to start putting in orders way in the spring. And sometimes they run out. So if you don't get your orders in early, sometimes you don't get all your vaccine. So you've got to get it ordered early, and usually in family medicine, for people very high risk or elderly, we would try to get them in and start in September. But everybody, October, this is the month the push is on to get it. So getting it by the end, then your antibodies are in place prior to the gin up of the disease season. Were we talking about this, that you can go online and you can see, it'll tell you the number of cases in the state. And it'll tell you by county, it'll tell you illness, I think it'll tell you the number of reported cases, hospitalized, and deaths. Was that you? We had a conversation. Well, okay, so I'll find that site you can get on every day. Amy, do you know it? Does that sound familiar? Okay.
I was going to ask another question though. So, I've noticed that every year it seems like we're offering the flu vaccine earlier and earlier. And I know that last year at the Arkansas Department of Health, we were trying to push people later. We were trying to advise people to actually not get their flu vaccine until like mid-October because the efficacy starts to wear off before the end of flu season if you get it too early.
It can. You're right about that. It can attenuate. So you're right. So you're kind of gambling.
We always said the prime was like between October 15th and Halloween.
Yeah, that would be perfect, because usually by March then it starts to wane. So in family medicine one year we were like pushing it all year long. We would give it to you anytime we could get you to take it. Because that was the year, I can't remember what, the season went really late, like May and June we were having flu episodes.
I know, gosh, this was maybe like 3 weeks ago, I think, 3 or 4 weeks ago. The hospital I worked at, they've already had 4 positive flus.
Really?
Already.
Wow.
This was like a month ago.
In September. Okay, so it's just a best guess. Okay. Takes 2 weeks. We're not using the nasal flu vaccine. Does not seem to be really effective again for this year, so don't recommend it. So there's lots of different types that you can get. So be aware of that. And be aware of what usually if you're in a group practice, you're going to decide as a group which one you're going for. Most of the time, outpatient clinics will go with a quadrivalent. Okay, so it'll go after 4 different types, 2 of the type A and 2 of the type B. So you've got an inactivated, that's your Afluria. That's a pretty common one. We use that at family medicine. Then you have a quadrivalent recombinant, so different, made differently. Maybe perhaps for some patients, that population, that would be a better one. You've also got the Fluzone, so you've got that high dose for adults. So over 65, it's a stronger vaccine, and it is meant to stimulate those weaker immune systems. The other is the Fluad is very similar to the Fluzone. Fluad adds a protein into the vaccine, and that also stimulates the immune system to respond. Either one of those are appropriate. And the last one is cell-based flu vaccine. This one is grown in a different source than egg-based. So eggs really aren't much of a problem for the flu vaccine anymore, but you need to be aware that there's very different types. Usually the Fluzone is very common to run out quickly. The older people know about it, they demand it, and it is one that doesn't stay around very often. Depends on how many you order. Okay, Tdap. 20% of adults have received a Tdap vaccination. 18,000 cases of whooping cough in 2015. The biggest problem, and they've got the commercial now, the grandmother turns into the wolf. She's got the pertussis. So for adults, it's usually just a very chronic cough that just goes on and on and on. It's annoying, but it doesn't really cause disease. But it can spread pertussis to the infants. So if you look down on the handout, the Tdap is tetanus, diphtheria, and acellular pertussis vaccination. So the acellular is inactivated. The other two are toxoids. Indication is for any adult who hasn't had it. So you've all had tetanus, diphtheria vaccines all your life. You've been vaccinated, you've gotten them. Now once you get to about college, usually you have to have them when you go off to college. Usually then you're into an every 10-year booster, okay? And the recommendation is for tetanus, diphtheria, the TD. What they're recommending with Tdap is that you make a substitution. In one of those cycles, you give them Tdap instead. Okay? The other recommendation comes is it doesn't matter how long, you don't have to wait 10 years to vaccinate them with this. So let's say they had a tetanus, diphtheria booster 3 years ago, you could go ahead and today give them Tdap. Okay? Make sense? Okay. So at some point they get this one time, then you put them back on the cycle for tetanus, diphtheria. Pregnant women are different in that they should have them with each pregnancy because of the risk of pertussis to the baby. Healthcare personnel of all ages should have it. There are a lot of products. If you look under there, there's 11 different ones in the United States for diphtheria and tetanus. 8 also protect against pertussis. You don't have to know this. I want you to be aware that just because you order this vaccine, there are multiple, and they're different. So you need to be aware of what you're giving. Some of them are indicated for infants, children, some for 2-year-olds and older, some for 7. It'll go again how it's made. There are 2 for Tdaps in the United States. So those are the ones you're going to be giving to adults. Questions about those? Okay, measles, mumps, rubella vaccinations. I would imagine all of you have had those, MMRs. Usually I think about 15 months is when they first start getting them. These are live attenuated, all 3. Who should get them? Everybody that was born 1957 and before is considered to be immune because it was rampant. Everybody got it. And if you didn't get it, you probably were exposed and had antibodies. Except if you're a healthcare worker, then you need to be vaccinated or you need to have titers drawn to make sure that you are you're immune. So look at the ones down there. Students at post-high school educational institutions. So when you go away to college, my sister went away to college the first year, her freshman year, she got measles. Went through their dorm. International travels, healthcare professionals. Women of childbearing age who are not pregnant, people who care for or around immunocompromised people, because you can transmit it, and then people living with HIV that do not have evidence of severe immunosuppression. So when I was a kid, all my brothers and sisters got the measles. I never did. So my mother just always assumed I was immune because I was exposed to 4 kids and I never got it. But when I got pregnant with Cameron and they did titers, I was 0. So I had to be vaccinated after he was born. So most of the indications are for 2 injections for adults. Oh, forgot what it was. Let me back up. This is just some stuff on tetanus. So very uncommon, but it's lockjaw. You all probably know that. Very painful. 10% of people who get it die. So it's really important to be vaccinated. Stepping on a nail, common. Organisms live in the dirt. So people who are in the dirt all the time, cuts, they can enter through there. Vaccination has dropped the reported case by 99%. Incredible, very uncommon. Diphtheria, Corynebacterium, diphtheria infection. You can see the plaque back here. The problem is sometimes that plaque gets so big that it occludes the airway and the people have difficulty breathing. Here is cutaneous diphtheria on skin, nasty disease. Vaccination has dropped the cases by 99%. Whooping cough, Bordetella pertussis. You know about it, the severe coughing spells, difficulty breathing. The sound is why it's called whooping cough, is the way it sounds. But look what it can happen. Weight loss, they just can't eat, or they're coughing, or they're using a lot of their energy for that. Incontinence, rib fractures from coughing straining so much. Pneumonia, death, newborns at greatest risk. Vaccinations dropped by 80%, the risk of infection. Measles, mumps, rubella, all viral. Measles, fever, cough, runny nose, sorry about that, red eyes, red body rash. Can cause encephalitis and death. Mumps, fever, headache, salivary glands, swelling, orchitis in older adolescents and men. Rubella, rash, sore throat, but the big problem is when women get it when they're pregnant. It can cause severe birth defects, deaf, blind, miscarriage. Vaccinations reduce the cause by 99%. Okay. Next one is varicella. How many of you had chicken pox? Anybody? Some of you did. You had it, or you had it?
I had the vaccine, but I actually didn't.
So you have varicella.
So the early vaccine, so here's the things, is that you see that with 80%, and the herpes zoster is only 50% reduction. So the early ones didn't protect as well. I think the ones now are much better. So you all had it. How many? There's a lot of you. Y'all are right on that cusp. I know Cameron was one of the first groups to get it, so that had been 24, whatever that was, 93, must have been 96 or so when they first came out. And a lot of people didn't vaccinate. I remember going to the pediatrician saying, okay, I want him to be vaccinated. And in conversation, mostly it was only people who had to deal with daycare. They just didn't want their kid to be out of daycare. Because it's like 7 to 10 days. You have to wait for them to crust over, and it takes a while for all those little lesions to get covered. So maybe you all fell into that. So how many of you that got it also were vaccinated? About half. Okay. Okay, so this one is live attenuated, so much stronger. I'll have to go back and look at the original and see if it was something different. 2 doses. Indications. Health professionals, if you haven't had it or haven't been vaccinated. If you're around immunocompromised people, teachers, child care workers, residents of nursing homes, residential settings, college students. Inmates, staff of correctional institutions, so anywhere there's close quarters. Military personnel would be that. Women of childbearing age who are not pregnant, adolescents and adults living with children, and international travel. So that's a lot of people. Most of your adults probably are going to fall into one of that category. So there's the rash, chicken pox. Blister-like rash, itching, fever. Vaccination is 90% effective, so maybe you all are part of that 10%, or maybe the early one wasn't as effective. In my household, it started with my sister, and every 2 weeks, another one of us got it. We didn't all three have it at the same time, and it got worse as we went through. My sister's was really mild. My mother couldn't figure out what it was, and by the time she did, then my brother got it, and then I got it. And I got to miss the last 2 weeks of school. It was glorious. I was 5th grade. They were like, you have a strawberry rash, and my mother, no, it's chicken pox. So I didn't have to go to school for the last 2 weeks of my age. Okay, herpes zoster. Well, I mean, if you're going to be sick, you ought to get some kind of Okay, shingles. So this is the downside of having chicken pox, is those virus set up residents, and they just go dormant for a long time. So here's shingles, very painful. And the worst part is the neuralgia, or the neuropathic pain that is associated with it, can last for years. My mother had it for 2 years after she had shingles. And it was more difficult to deal with than the original rash. 28% of adults 60 and older have received it. It's a one-time, they think. They're waiting to see, because if you look, it is, I'll put it on the paper, I guess. It reduces the risk of developing shingles by 51%. So you might say, well, that's not worth doing it. But if you've had the shingles, it's worth it. If you got 50-50, take it. 67% reduction in the post-herpetic neuralgia. So that's good. They will probably get better with this, and they're also trying to figure out whether or not we need to do boosters. So right now it's a one-time, but it may be that down the road we'll see other recommendations for every few years you get a repeat.
Can you get it younger than that if you request
Yes,
it?
you can.
Because I have a friend
Oh,
who's,
yes.
she's like 28 and she got shingles, and now her post-herpetic neuralgia is so bad that she's having to have like 2 back surgeries, and like she's in all
Wow.
this therapy.
Wow.
Like, that scares me.
You can't see shingles in the youngest I've seen shingles is in a 14-year-old, but I'm sure it happens
My
younger
nephew
than
had
that.
it when he was like 5 or 6.
Oh, really? Wow. So if you've had the shingles, now this is a different case than almost every other vaccine. If you've had the shingles, you can get vaccinated. And it is thought to reduce the incidence of a repeat or recurrence. So that's something that's a little bit different. But yes, you can get it younger.
Okay.
They just recommend, if you haven't had it by then, is everyone 60 and older to get it. Let's see. That's it. Live attenuated. When I got it, I had a huge reaction. I got it a lot younger than 60. Man, it was impressive. Okay, human papillomavirus. So I pulled this fact sheet just to show you, because it is amazing the stats. So can lead to cancer. That's one of the big reasons to vaccinate. 80 million infected. That's a third of the country. 14 million teens infected every year. 30,000 people affected by cancer caused by that virus. So if you look at the types, cervical is the #1, but there's all these others we don't really ever talk about. Oropharynx, male is blue, the light green is female. Cancer of the anus, vulvar cancer, penile cancer, vaginal cancer, so many different types of cancer, so many reasons to vaccinate. So they have continued to change the timelines. So the Gardasil 4 is after 4 different serotypes. So you're looking at the serotypes that are most linked to cancers. Okay? So not all HPV is associated with development of types of cancer. The Gardasil 9 is 9 serotypes. I could find nothing that recommends one over the other. Indications, so females 13 to 26 now, I think we'll see it extended. I bet it'll go on up in age. Males 13 through 29 who haven't been vaccinated. So who should be vaccinated? Gay, bisexual, other men who have sex with men, transgenders, folks, and immunocompromised. Dosing schedules are a little bit different. There are 3. 3 for teens, 15 through 26. I think they're all for 3 injections.
I read on the internet that it was 2, and I'm on like a screen page, like looking at the vaccine.
Let me look, because I pulled it off the CDC's. They recommend 3 for everybody. I'll look one other place. It's like they're all 3. I don't know if that's a change this year.
I'll try to find where it now. Might not have been a lot of the first.
Okay. Questions about those or any other comments? Okay, let's look at pneumococcal pneumonia. 20% of adults at high risk. So high risk is usually looking at people under the age of 64 who have another disease that puts them at high risk. So that would be diabetes, cardiac disease, lung disease. Usually those are your big ones, immunocompromised. Usually chronic disease. So there's always, if you work in a hospital, this will be one of your quality indicators because there will be constant push to get this number up. And so one of the times we really look to do it is when people are put in the hospital. They're captive, we've got protocols in place, and so getting those numbers up is important. 67 million adults unvaccinated at risk for pneumococcal disease. So the recommendations is that you be vaccinated if you're under 64, high risk. Okay. Over 65, recommend everybody have it. And they recommend a second dose after 65 if you've had the first dose before 65 and it's been at least 5 years. If you've got diabetes, everybody should get it. So that was one of the ones we always gave. This is a good one to pair up with your flu vaccine. If they've had it and they can't remember and they don't, and you revaccinate them, you're not going to hurt them. It won't cause any untoward effect. More recently, if you look on the top of page 5, the recommendation is to also vaccinate adults with the pneumococcal conjugate, the inactivated vaccine, the 13. This is the one kids get. But most adults that you're going to see never would have gotten these because the vaccine is not that old, and so I don't know what year it came out. You all may have gotten it as kids, but I didn't. So all adults 65 and older should get it. They would not have gotten this series. So how to time it is important. So if they have not had either one, they recommend that they have the Prevnar 13 first. And then you follow it a year by the Pneumovax, the 23. If you give the Pneumovax 23 first, wait a year and then give them the Prevnar. Questions? You want me to repeat it? Abby, you want me to say it again? Okay. Okay, so Prevnar 13 is recommended first. if you have the choice. Wait a year, then give them the Pneumovax 23. If you give them the Pneumovax 23, fine. Wait a year and then give them Prevnar 13.
Dr. Matthews?
Yeah,
I was gonna ask this, I actually got the 23 a couple years ago.
okay.
So, but I don't have like a high, but like because I got pneumonia in college, like they told me
Okay.
I should get it. So
Yep.
do they do that too? Like if you already get it, sometimes they make you get it.
Yes, yeah, because it's not common for young people to get pneumonia. So yes, I think that's very reasonable. Questions about the pneumococcal? So if you look on there with the Prevnar, it's a conjugate. So what did I tell you about the polysaccharide conjugates? Why is it conjugate? Conjugated with what? What do we put with it? Protein. Why do we do that? Greater stimulus to the immune response, and then it can be given to kids under the age of 2. Okay, good. All right. Hepatitis A, so caused by the hepatitis A virus, usually acute illness, usually after you've been somewhere where, like usually food, beverages. When I was in the poison center, I can't tell you how many times Taco Bell came up with people very ill. Just saying, that was just the one that commonly we heard from. So it can be direct contact, contaminated food or beverages, or things people have used to eat with or handed by an infected person. Yellow skin, eyes, fatigue, nausea, anorexia. Usually people are very acutely ill, spread by fecal oral routes, and they hadn't washed their hands. So probably most of you had these as kids. Would have been common, at least in the 20-year-olds, I would say, in your vaccination regimen. So it's an inactivated whole viral vaccine. There does come in combination with the Hep B, so you can get Twinrix, which is A and B. We also, for people who've been exposed, we can immunize them. And there's particular vaccines just for that. I'm not going to test you over that, but just know that in a big exposure, you can go back and try to prevent them from getting it. So who should get it? So people who live in have high rates of Hep A. I've seen it like in nursery care workers is common that they need to be vaccinated. Men who have sex with other men, people who use street drugs, sharing needles. If you're traveling to an area that has a high rate, long-term liver disease. Blood products to help your blood clots. Oh, hemophilia. Work with animals that have been infected or in research settings. It's 2 doses, at least 6 months apart. That, to me, is the hard part. That's the Hep B and Hep A were the ones we had the hardest time with family medicines because it's keeping track. And the other thing, it's getting people to come back on time. So that one is a hard one. You have to have some kind of system that will help you to get that done. Hepatitis B, this is the bad one. Not that hepatitis A isn't bad. Hepatitis B is, again, a virus. Similar symptoms, nausea, lack of appetite, tired, diarrhea, stools turn clay color. That really freaks people out and may bring them in. Yellowing of the skin and whites of the eyes. First ask them if they took kaopectate, because that will turn it white. High fatality rate. So if people have a long-term, this is one of those long-term diseases, then middle age, 55, 64, they can die of it. They can be chronic, lifelong carriers, so that's really a problem. They're not symptomatic, but they can spread the disease. So for Hep B, it's an inactivated vaccine. Also comes as a recombinant vaccine, and its indication, everybody should get it. It's a bad disease, and so we want to prevent it. This one is a 3 injection, so it's 0, 1 month, 6 months. That's a hard one. Questions about those? Okay. Meningococcal, is your age group have that? Did you all have that? Yes. Going into school, that would make sense. That's one of the places where you get outbreaks. So it's an inflammation of the, not inflammation, it's an infection of the meninges. Meningococcal is caused by Neisseria meningitidis. There's 3 different bacteria that cause meningitis. This is one of the worst. When I was in peds, I saw a lot of this. It's heartbreaking. We had a little girl who came in fine one day, got sick the next. These red purpuritic rash showed up the next day, and over the course of probably 10 days, she auto-amputated every finger she had. Every day we would come in, there would just be, the ends of her fingers would just shrivel and drop off. It was awful. She died after, I don't know, a couple of weeks. Awful, awful disease. So now we have a conjugated polysaccharide vaccine against these. This is the worst of the 3. So getting the people immunized is great. If they've ever seen it, they would never wish it on anybody. So adults at increased risk for meningococcal infections during an outbreak. So I would think that would be like military, maybe people who work on college campuses like in dorms. I don't know if they still have dorm or house mothers, but those would be people I think about. Or people with anatomic or functional asplenia, without a spleen, or persistent complement component deficiency. So I don't know what exactly that would be called. I don't know if that's the term of the disease. So you know complement is part of the immune response in terms of making it so that an organism or an invader looks foreign, and it helps the immune system attack and know what is not self. Okay. Okay, so the last one is Haemophilus influenza, so H-flu. Another one that is a very common cause and deadly cause of pneumonias in adults as well as kids. Incubation period's pretty short. You can see that of the H-flu diseases, pneumonia is one of the biggest ones. So you'll see it in adults like alcoholics, chronically ill patients will commonly come in with H-flu. Another inactivated, it's a conjugated polysaccharide, not usually given to healthy adults. So this is going to be for your folks who are more at risk, so your people without spleens, people who have received stem cell transplants for different cancers perhaps. Those folks would be, so that's going to be really select. Okay, do you know more than when you came in? That's good. A good day. All right, thank you. This is all of mine that'll be on the test then. And I will see you next week.
Will it still be like 3 hours worth of questions?
No, it'll be, we did 2 hours, we'll do 8 questions. That's all I'll see then.
She's just setting up like the outline.
Yeah, I just saw.
It's not assigning anything, it's just the
Unless it's